US Nationals was this past weekend, and coming off the back of it, we have a lot of data about what the high seas meta is going to look like. So today we're going to break down the high seas data that we got from US Nationals so that you can be prepared going to your Nationals event. But before we jump in and we talk about all the data and all the information, I just want to take a second to congratulate Majin Bey. I've never had a chance to meet him face to face, but I've heard nothing but good things about him. He is a monster card player. He's really good at multiple games. And on top of that, he's very, very good at the Wizard class. So to see him win US Nationals felt like a long time coming, but I'm super happy for him. And Majin, if you see this, congrats, man. It seems very well deserved. Then on kind of a separate note here, there is something that come from Nationals that really surprised me. Gravy Bones really performed well. I have to admit, I did not have that very high on my bingo card coming into this weekend, but a lot of the bigger teams were on Gravy Bones for this weekend, and it even managed to make its way into top 8. We're going to talk more about that later, but just Gravy Bones' ability to like really utilize the allies is very, very powerful. Being able to utilize like, Humperdinck and Chum, like just these powerful, majestic allies are really, really good. And the longer the game goes on, they get better. But also you're able to play cards like Conqueror of the High Seas and Golden Tipple, which is really like draft chaff in a lot of ways, but it's also very, very good. It sets up allies, it lines up the whole thing. I know a lot of people that were on like 6 to 9 copies of Golden Tipple. So seeing Gravy perform in all of its powerhouse of cards from commons to majestics is really, really cool to see this past weekend. Thanks for stopping by, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. The first thing we're going to take a look at is going to be our day 2 hero conversion numbers and conversion rate going into day 2. Now, this picture is the total like heroes that made it to day 2 in Classic Constructed. And I'm going to start off by saying that we have to take some of this with a little like a grain of salt here because draft does affect people and who got into day 2. Because I'm sure there was somebody who might have been like 4-1 or 5-0 that did not make the cut going into draft. So it's very interesting to see and just kind of things to consider like that. But I think that Florian being the #1 represented hero base going into day 2 is not super surprising. This was a very heavy pick for like a most played deck in the field coming into this weekend. Florian's dominated recently, and I think coming into this weekend with the new Earth 3 block card, like it's not surprising. 30% conversion rate is, honestly, like it's not super great, but it's not bad. It's very like middle of the pack. It's kind of okay. There were a lot of good Florian players there this weekend, but also Florian was a very easy deck to target. And I say that because everybody knew that Florian was going to be there, so everybody came prepared to play against it. So it being 30% is not super surprising, and it's a little bit lower than I think a lot of people wanted, but it was still the #1 represented deck going into day 2. Azalea being second on the list at 17 copies and 44% also kind of makes sense to me. Azalea was a very good pick for the weekend. I know there was quite a few of them in day 2 that I like ran into or saw doing well at some higher tables. So Azalea was a good pick for the weekend, and I think she does a good job at playing the mid-range game into Florian would dominate, but also kind of picks on the aggro decks with some of her powerful cards. Third on the list is the one that is probably the most surprising to me. Gravy Bones had 13 copies in day 2 and a 52% conversion rate. That is really, really powerful and really cool to see. This is like so surprising, and I know I just talked about this a second ago, but it's so surprising to me because these board state like ally based heroes generally take time to figure out. So this is a good sign for us that LSS is really starting to figure out how to like, balance that, teeter-totter like kind of thing and just make sure that the heroes aren't overpowered or they're not like, super like bad coming out of the gate. So this is pretty cool to see. So Gravy Bones being the 3rd most represented deck and a pretty high conversion rate is really good. Mario being 4th and Prism tied. Like, so 4th and 5th are basically like tied for 4th here, both at 12. Prism was more represented coming into this weekend than I thought it was going to be. I have to admit, Prism was in a pretty good spot for the weekend and just honestly like was in a much better place than I thought it was going to be. I was prepared for Prism, but I didn't expect Prism to be at the top of the list. She was the 4th most represented deck and then the 5th most represented deck going into day 2. Mario having a 39% conversion rate's not surprising in any way. Like the day 2 data just looks, it makes sense. Mario is very powerful. They, I guess, I don't know. They are probably the best assassin in my opinion right now. So Mario being up there makes a lot of sense. New and Verdant's tied at 11 also makes a lot of sense. Everybody was saying that New was dead for a while, and I don't think that's true at all. New's on the verge of hitting Living Legend, and I think that, she did very, very well. There was a copy in top 8, I think. So New and Verdant's being tied at 11 makes sense. But you'll notice that, Verdant's had a 58% conversion percentage. That means that over half, just like Gravy Bones so far, have qualified for day 2, which speaks to the real power level of the deck and how good of a target pick it was for this past weekend. Kano and Vincent at 9%, or 9 people making it to day 2, and 39% conversion rate. Honestly, I'm a little surprised that it's higher than Cinder, but we're going to talk about Cinder here in a minute. Kano, I think, was a good pick for the weekend. Also picked on Florian very well. Had some other good matchups at the high tables. I was not expecting Vincent to do as well as, the hero did. I think Vincent's fine, but I think it's always one card away from just doing really well, unless you're playing against just an aggro deck like Syndra, for example, to just kind of abuse and pick on. So I don't know. I'm a little surprised by that, but it also kind of fits into the narrative here. Syndra had 8 copies in day 2. Now, not to brag, I was one of those 8. I'm just kidding. Syndra did have 8 copies, and she had a 19% conversion rate. That is one of the lowest on this chart. In fact, I think it's third, 5th lowest, maybe something like that. It's in the bottom 5 of heroes that converted, which is a little surprising to me. I thought Syndra was in a much better spot going into the weekend. I did have a couple people tell me that nobody on their team was playing Syndra. I even had somebody tell me that they were we told our team you cannot play Syndra coming into this event because they thought it was a trap pick, which is really interesting. So I don't know, Syndra really underperformed. I think some of that is deck building, maybe a little bit of consistency. Plus at this high level, everybody knows how to block against Syndra now. So that makes it a little bit tougher. So Syndra having a really poor conversion rate tells us a lot about what we're looking at for the rest of national season. Going down through the rest here, we kind of have a smattering here of, some different things we're looking at. KO having a 13% conversion rate. It's very low. I'm very surprised. I thought KO was in a really good spot for the weekend. I'd be curious to know how many people didn't make day 2 because of draft, but I would have picked KO to be in a really good spot just on raw numbers. Also being able to deal with Gravy Bones and clear the board. So that's a little surprising to me. Max at 100%, which is hilarious to me. The one person playing Max made day 2. I'm super happy for them. Max is cool, so I like that. Victor at 60%. Now, it's a little surprising. I mean, there was only 5 people playing Victor, obviously, based off this number. But still, 5 people playing Victor and 3 of them made it to day 2. I'm curious to know, if the other 2 people ran into Gravy Bones a lot, or, if the 3 that made it to day 2 just dodged it all day. Because I think that Victor has a lot of bad matchups right now. Just looking at the top of the board here, I think Verdance is pretty bad. I think New's pretty bad. Gravy Bones is really bad. Kano is pretty bad. Florian is fine if you know what's going on, but stuff like that. So there's a lot of very questionable matchups for Victor up there. So I was pretty surprised to see people playing it this past weekend. But yeah, I mean, Victor was 60%. Kind of showing out a little bit. So maybe we'll see some more people playing Victor as we move towards the, second half of national season and as we move into Singapore. But other things, pretty low percentages, pretty low down here, just nothing really crazy to talk about. Just a couple of surprising, picks towards the top there, really with Gravy Bones having that 52% conversion rate, which is really, really good for a week 1 hero. The next piece that we're going to take a look at is the top 32 standings. Now, when I said that we're going to break down all of the data, I meant we're going to get pretty granular here with a lot of the data that we're looking at. So it's very easy to say, oh, well, these heroes were in top 8, or, these heroes did this, or these heroes did this. But I feel like to really get a good understanding of what performed well, you need to look at the top 32 and 64 even to see what people were right outside, what people were on the cusp, what heroes were playing that were right outside of the edge. So taking a look at the top 32, we know what was in the top 8, but you'll notice that there's 2 Kasais in the top 30, like in the top 16. Like there's a 10th place and a 12th place Kasai here, which is really, really cool to see. Because I know that Kasai was like played this weekend, but Kasai wasn't like, I think, this massive, crazy good contender going into the weekend. And to see two of them in the top 16 is really cool. Alexander Vore at 13th playing Acilio is really awesome to see. Now, I think he was the only Acilio like in the top 64, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. I'm not sure. But yeah, like, you know, just seeing some of these like off-brand heroes do really well is really cool. So, excuse me, as we continue looking at this, there are some heroes that really stand out on the list that we have. There were 6 copies of Florian in the top 32. There were 6 copies of Mario in the top 32. There were 4 copies of Verdance in the top 32. And there were 3 copies of Gravy Bones. Now, this stands out to me because these were the heroes with the highest numbers of, like, you know, people playing this deck inside of the top 32. And if you top 32 US Nationals, you were on a good deck and you probably got a little lucky. But you know, there's a lot of singletons, there's a lot of 2-ofs here. Like there's a 1-of Cinder at 16th, which is really cool. I was personally checking out their list earlier. I thought it was pretty neat. But just, you know, seeing what heroes really performed well says a lot. You know, there was 11 Verdants going into day 2 and 4 of them made it to the top 32, which is really cool. So it's pretty neat to see. But yeah, I mean, just seeing the whole top 32 deck list is a really good piece of information to have because you know what was on the outside looking in and what almost got there. As card players, I know you guys like to hear numbers and stats, so I'm going to hit you guys with some statistics about the top 4 heroes in the 32 and 64, starting with Mario. So when we look at Mario, there were 12 copies of Mario that made it to day 2. There were 6 copies of Mario in the top 32, which means half of them, exactly 50%, made it into the top 32. There were 8 copies of Mario in the top 64, meaning that 66.6%, or exactly 2/3, made it into the top 64. Now, this is really good information to have because it lets you know how powerful Mario is. It lets you know that Mario is doing all the right things, that they're having a lot of copies in the top 32 and 64, puts them in a good position. And even if you're not willing to play Mario, it lets you know that you need to tech against it and be prepared for it. Next up on the list is Verdance when we talk about numbers and percentages. There were 11 people who made it to day 2 playing Verdance, 2 of which made top 8, by the way. But there were 4 Verdants in the top 32 for 36% even being inside of that top 32 mark that we're looking at there. Looking at top 64, there were 7 of the 11 day 2 Verdants made it in the top 64, meaning 63.6% made it into the top 64. Now, I like to pick top 64 here because top 64 is like what people commonly refer to as cash. Now, being in the cash is a really good place to be at any tournament, especially when, you know, it's 2, 3, maybe 500, $600. You know, it's not a bad way to spend your weekend. So having 7 copies of Verdance, or 63% of all day 2 Verdants, in the top 64 really shows that not only did she have a very good day 1 into day 2 conversion percentage, but day 2 results stood the test of time as well. So Mario and Verdance really with those higher percentages that we're looking at. Next on the list is going to be Florian. Florian had 19 copies going into day 2, which was the most of any deck moving into day 2. There were 6 of them in the top 32 for a percentage of 31.5%, and there were 8 Florians in the top 64 for 42.1%. Now, our percentages, they drop down a little bit here when we're looking at this, but still, if 8 of the 19, like so a little under half, is making it into the top 64, that's a pretty good conversion percentage. Now, I know that Florian's day 1 to day 2 conversion percentage was only 30, but then again, we turn around and we have 42% in the top 64. So I think that fits pretty well. Florian's still a really good deck. Florian plays the mid-range game super well, and I think that Florian is a good pick moving forward for your nationals, especially if you don't know what you want to play and you really like a mid-range strategy. The last hero we're going to talk about is by far the most surprising in my opinion, and we're going to talk about Gravy Bones. Gravy Bones had a 52% day 1 into day 2 conversion percentage, which is really neat. Of the 13 Gravy Bones decks moving into day 2, 3 of them made it into the top 32, which is 23% flat. And 6 of them made it into the top 64 for a 46.1%. Now again, you'll notice that those percentages, they keep dropping as we're looking at some of the heroes. But I still think that this is week 1. People have time to take Gravy Bones decks that did well at US Nationals and improve upon them. You can take them and innovate, and you can make them even better. And plus, Gravy Bones is kind of like a skill check hero, kind of like Prism or Illusionist is what I would compare it to. Because if your opponent doesn't know how to deal with the allies or play the game correctly, you can just run away with the game absolutely very fast. Plus, Humperdinck comes in for 11. That'll probably close the game most of the time. Guys, let me know in the comments down below what you think about the breakdown. Do you think some heroes I might not have talked about have a really good shot at winning nationals? Or maybe I talked about your hero and you have some different thoughts. Either way, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about it. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take it easy, guys.